Hello, Calling Up community. I am Claudia Alick, and today we will be talking about language. I'm going to be doing two posts. The first post is responding specifically to a question from one of the Calling Up community members. I'm trying my best to encourage you to stop DMing me, because generally you do that and then I just call you up on the phone and give you a good answer. But instead, I am asking folks to do the extra piece of labor, post it to the Patreon or some other public space where I can respond to it and more people can learn from the answer. Okay. And just thank you very much to Rob for doing the extra step of taking his question out of the DMs and sharing it publicly. This is from Rob. I feel like our words are failing us. I've been working my way through white fragility, and it really got me thinking about terminology and word choice. One of the barriers we run into time after time is the conflation of personal racial bias, which most people agree is or leads to bad behavior, and systematic institutionalized racism, which most white people will absurdly insist does not exist. For example, someone can point out that a black person can't be racist. From the second systematic definition, this is 100% true. A black person can hold personal anti-white bias in their heart and mind, but racism, as I define it here, requires one to be on the high side of the social power dynamic. Nevertheless, this assertion will make many white people's heads explode. Of course, black people can be racist, followed by personal examples of being mistreated by that one black person that one time 10 years ago. So, I feel like folks get distracted fighting over the definition of racism. If there were two different words, one for personal bias and one for institutionalized systems of privilege, perhaps we could skip the argument and get to the substance? Here's the problem. The white fragility response, the act of trying to deny reality, to deny that white supremacy culture exists, that white domination in all of our systems is killing us, and that's a major problem, that these acts of racism are actual acts of racism, that's the entire point of what the person's doing. So the act of coining different words, it's not so useful. The reason that in our practice, and I always tell people to check out one of my early posts on performativity and language. In the calling up practice, we acknowledge that words are linguistic tools that we're using to point to different meanings, right? And those linguistic tools, they can be co-opted so that they're pointing to different meanings, or they can be evolved in collaborative ways to refer to new meanings. So that means it's good to maintain shared definitions so you can do work together, but I'm encouraging people to not be language police out in the world. The point isn't the words, it's the group understanding and the meaning making together, right? So when you're having a conversation about racism, generally you're not talking about racism in a general, vague way. Usually you're talking about some specific thing that's happening in the world, and you're feeling frustrated because somebody now has you having a conversation about what the definition of racism is. Now, of course, racism is a term that is in reference to real-world history and contemporary society. So, if we are in a white supremacy culture, racism, the word racism, or the concept of racism, is something that's operating to maintain and increase white supremacy. So that's why saying a black person is racist when they've acted in some individual prejudiced way towards a white person, well, that's nonsense, right? Now, of course, a black person can have internalized racism, right? And where they're acting in ways that are increasing white supremacy culture in the world. So that's when you can use the word that way. But if you have someone who is denying that white supremacy culture exists, then their denial is going to be about you're using that word wrong. So if you're having a conversation about something that's about this is happening to this group of people in the United States, and that's wrong, and this person wants to have a conversation about, yeah, but this one time something happened to me, therefore that isn't happening, that's not going on. So if you can, in your response, always bring it back to the subject at hand, what you're actually talking about. And if you can, point out the fact that the act of changing the subject, making the conversation about that person's individual experience rather than the larger societal things that we all already know are going on, is an act of denial and is an act of trying to protect white supremacy culture. It's something that people do. we were raised in white supremacy culture. It can be deeply frustrating to feel like someone is playing a semiotics game with you and you're trying to talk about something real with people who actually want to make change in the world. And now suddenly you're having a conversation with someone who doesn't want to make change in the world. So you have options. In those moments, you can decide, maybe you can tell that person that's a different conversation. And if you want to have a conversation about your understanding of what racism means, I'll start a new thread for that. I'll start a new post and we can talk about that there. But here, on this social media space, in this post, we're going to talk about the thing that we're talking about, not the thing you want us to talk about. I really encourage you to shut it down quickly. Don't have 5 or 6 different back and forths with someone who's insisting on changing the subject. I say all of this, and I'm telling you right now, coining new words, it's a little useful for the meaning making that we are doing. But ultimately, we've been making up a lot of words, which is taking me to post number 2. Thanks, Calling Up Community.